episode 4 of Art Uncensored podcast. Can you believe it? We're already on episode 4. That means that this podcast has been live for a month and no one's died yet. I'm your host, Em, and before we jump into today's topic, which I gotta say is probably the most interesting, unique, not necessarily controversial, but it's just incredibly fascinating. Yes, probably even more fascinating than the Mona Lisa. We're going to talk about the necessary introductory shit that I say pretty much every episode. First, we're at 4 episodes, which means we only need one more episode until we can upload onto Spotify. Spotify has a rule where you have to have 5 episodes running before you can upload and use their platform, and I'm really excited about that because Spotify is probably my favorite way to listen to podcasts, so that's going to be great. 2, reviews. I haven't actually gotten any reviews on Apple Music or iTunes or whatever, but they really do help the podcast, so if you enjoy the show, please leave your review. A lot of people think that you can only leave reviews if they're negative, but that's actually not true. Positive reviews help the podcast, give me ideas, give me feedback, ways I can improve the show, and if you have any suggestions for topics on future episodes, that's a great place to leave those as well. And now, without further stalling, the apocalypse is upon us. And I couldn't find a quote from today's featured artist, so I just found an apocalypse quote on Goodreads that I really liked. Don't wake me for the end of the world unless it has very good special effects. It's by Roger Zelazny, Prince of Chaos. I have no idea who he is, but it's a really good quote, and it really ties in well with today's featured artist. Before we jump in, I'm just going to give you a little bit of backstory about the apocalypse itself. Recorded writings of the apocalypse can be traced all the way back to a stone tablet dating from 2800 BC. So that's 2,800 years before the Common Era, or if you're religious or prefer the old way, before Christ. That's a really long time. That's over 4,000 years from now. It's almost 5,000 years. Is it 5,000? Almost 5,000, yeah. And this quote, it was found on a stone tablet, this ancient stone tablet, and it said, "Our earth is degenerate in these later days," meaning that even 4,000 years ago, people were aware that the earth was not going to last forever, which really makes you wonder how long the earth has been around. And I know we have a lot of geologists and scientists that study these things, and we have attested that the earth has been around for a really fucking long time, but just the fact that they were conscious of it blows my mind. We always think of historic people in those early times as kind of uncivilized, stupid, but they clearly were not stupid. They just had their own way of expressing their intelligence. Throughout history, every culture and religious sect, every nation has held some sort of apocalyptic teaching or belief in a second coming. So the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims all believed in a second coming of either their prophets, their God, etc. And a lot of pagan religions believe that as well. And if they didn't believe in a second coming, they just believed that eventually the world was going to implode. And so for over 4,000 years, people have been trying to calculate, predict, and foretell the end of the world. And I mean, we're all a bunch of doomsday fanatics, apparently, because even now in the modern era, we're all still obsessed with the apocalypse. You have apocalypse movies, apocalypse literature, apocalyptic art, video games, the list goes on. And so what does all of this have to do with Renaissance artists? Enter Hieronymus Bosh. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right, so sorry to everyone who's a Bosch fan. If you've ever seen a horrifying medieval representation of hell, pain, and suffering, chances are you were looking at a Hieronymus Bosch painting. Just in case you mere mortals weren't familiar with this fucking awesome guy, Hieronymus Bosch did all those paintings with the crazy tiny details that often depicted, like, these whimsical but horrifying scenes of what he thought heaven and hell kind of looked like. And this guy Bosch is considered to be the first modern artist by surrealists, and a lot of his work has been used to inspire what we now know as apocalyptic art. A lot of his monsters and whatnot are featured in video games. And whenever I look at his paintings, I always think of when I read Dante's Inferno back in high school. And I mean, I had to read the Paradiso and the Purgatorio as well, but nothing was as good as the Inferno. I even named my cat after him, Dante, my love. It's just, these images are very, very vivid. And if you have time right now, definitely Google Hieronymus Bosh. If you can't spell that, just type in Bosch paintings and he'll come up. Or his most known work is called The Garden of Earthly Delights. And if you see that, you'll know like right away who I'm talking about, because it's a very, very famous work and a lot of people are familiar with it without knowing they're familiar with it. So anyway, he's considered to be the first modern artist by surrealists because of his bold departure from depicting mere reality and his endeavor in bringing the interior life and its unconscious machinations out of the mind's dark recesses and onto the canvas. So, in simpler, non-quoted terms, it means that instead of just painting what he saw, it was almost like he was painting his dreams, where he would take something real and add a lot to it. And that's what surrealism is, where you take something that could be real and twist it so that it's like it's still real, but it's imaginary at the same time. And most famous surrealist that comes to mind when we talk about surrealism would be Salvador Dali. I can't wait to do an episode on him. Bosch was known for his very observant eye and extreme capacity for capturing detail. And if you look at these paintings, they're insane because they're just this sprawling canvas and all these little tiny things. And a lot of times you have to look at it a couple times to really be able to take it all in because there's just so much. It's like when you read an adult level book when you're a kid. And you like it, but you're not really sure why, and as you get older, you keep going back to it, and the more you read it, the more you understand. It's the same principle, where the more you look at this, the more you see. It's really, really cool. Bosch presented his work often through the usage of a triptych, which is 3 panels separated, but it's all one piece, and this really shows the epic dimensions of the stories that he wanted to paint. So when you have one painting, you can do one big painting, and that's really cool, but if you have the same size canvas, but it's split into 3 pieces, that really captures the magnitude of what you're doing, almost where you're saying, I couldn't fit it all on one canvas. So before we get into the really fun bits, the 10-minute history. And again, sorry for my brutal slaughter of medieval or Renaissance Dutch people's names. I'm really bad at that. Hieronymus van Aken was born in his grandfather's house in the 1450s in the flourishing Dutch town of Bosch of the Duchy of Brabant, a state of the Roman Empire, and so that was actually located in the low regions of what we now know as the Netherlands. And since this guy was born in the 1400s, we don't actually know when he was born. And the only reason we have any idea at all is it's a guess based off a self-portrait drawing he did when he was 60, which dated 1516. So if you do the math, that puts us right around the 1450s. And again, since he was so long ago, there's really not a lot known of his childhood, except for the fact that he was born into a family of artists. His grandfather was a painter. 4 of his 5 children were also painters, including Hieronymus's father. And in the town's records, the young artist was named and recorded along with a sister and 2 other brothers. So Bosch had 3 siblings. So it's believed, even though we don't know a lot, it's generally believed that his childhood and youth during the reign of Philip the Good was a cheerful and happy time for this wealthy and prosperous family. It's nice. He had a good life. I think he's the first artist I've talked about that literally the only thing they say about his early life was that he had a good time. That's really cool. Good for you, Bosch. Hieronymus later adopted the artistic name of Bosch, which paid a tribute to his hometown Den Bosch, which means the forest. And besides this basic factual information derived from records, we don't really know anything else about Bosch's education and early life. He doesn't have any notebooks, letters, books, or any other reference materials to connect him, to give us an idea of what his life was like. However, because of his family's history with painting, it's generally believed that somebody in his family taught him to paint. And going beyond that, his personality is also a mystery, along with his personal interests, his views on art, what else he studied, and who influenced him as an artist. So, again, we really know nothing about this guy, which I kind of find sad, but at the same time, again, art is a mystery, and you can't understand everything, so that's pretty cool. However, the city he lived in belonged to the Roman Empire, and so it's probable that Bosch was in contact with classical Roman art and was at least somewhat influenced by the Renaissance era. So again, at the beginning I said medieval, and I don't know why I said medieval, but the correct time period is Renaissance, so sorry to anyone that caught that and was wondering what the hell I was talking about. He was probably influenced by the Renaissance age that was blooming in Rome and the other European schools of painting at the time, such as the works of the Flemish painters. However, this is all historical speculation because his actual style is a radical departure from it was like nothing the world had ever seen before. Most artists of the day were focusing on creating these gorgeous literal depictions of life, historical moments, religious moments. We have the Annunciation from this time, the Last Supper, the Sistine Chapel. All of these things were very, very realistic. They documented history, basically. The paintings of the time were portraits, realism, all these things that were documenting things that were happening in real time or historical concepts that were now being painted. So the trend of the day was you paint what's real. And Bosch was interpreting the same real stuff, except in a very different, unique way. He used a lot of really rich, deep colors and heavy brush strokes in contrast to the warm tones, the neutral tones, and the silky. You can't even see the brush strokes in a lot of other Renaissance paintings like the Mona Lisa. You think about how it's also so calming to look at and so peaceful, and the browns and the warm tones, and then it's all so detailed but so smooth. And then you look at a Bosch painting and you're like, holy shit, my brain just imploded. Anyway, he did not just recreate scenes from the Bible. He it's like he read a passage from the Bible, then he went to sleep after doing some hallucinogenics, had a nightmare, and that's what ended up on the canvas. He filtered them through his imagination and transformed them into these wild new worlds, dense with symbolism and absurdity born of the subconscious. So that's, in simple terms, like basically painting your dreams. And his paintings were often viewed as cautionary tales, which concerned the morality of man, and they were full of these hybrid beings, which would be centaurs, satyrs, unicorns, yay, I don't know, but fantastical creatures. And all of his... Can we get through an episode where I don't either cough, sneeze, or hiccup? It's a new goal. He had a cast of characters that were both real and made up. And that's really the first record in which an artist so heavily disowned the confines of known reality to present something entirely new. And that's why we call him the Father of Surrealism, or at least, I don't know if they call him the Father of Surrealism. I call him the Father of Surrealism. They call him the first surrealist because no one was doing anything like this, and he used the same concepts that the modern surrealists use today, where you escape the confines of reality and create something totally unique, often terrifying, and leaves your viewer wondering what the hell is going on. And it's really cool because he influenced this movement half a millennium earlier than when it actually came to be. And he is described by Carl Jung as the original discoverer of the unconscious. It's beautiful. During his lifetime, so this is another cool thing, Andy Warhol was very famous when he was alive, but unlike Da Vinci and Van Gogh, his work was actually collected in multiple countries in Europe, and he was very popular, very famous. And I know Da Vinci was popular, but I don't think he reached the same level of fame that this Bosch guy did during his life. He was widely revered and imitated by his students and followers. However, despite the general appreciation for his work, and because of his complex language and themes, in the years after he died, his influence and impact were not as widespread as other painters of his era, such as the Renaissance painters. However, he did influence specific painters of the 16th century and the later centuries, just because the thing was, his paintings were so complex, it was really hard to imitate, whereas you could look at the Renaissance painters and see where they were coming from, what inspired them, and you could really draw on that, whereas it's a little bit harder to look at a Bosch painting and figure out how he did it. So I'd say that's probably why his work was less revered right after his death and only came to be appreciated much later on. Most markedly, though, is the influence we find of Bosch on the Surrealist movement, like I said. And this can be the symbolic imagery and strangeness of reality can be seen especially in the paintings of Joan Miro and Salvador Dali, which mirrored the dream qualities of Bosch's work. It is believed that Dali's The Great Masturbator, painted in 1929, drew largely from Bosch's The Garden of Earthly Delights, particularly with its adaptation of a human face imposed within an organic element. I actually have never looked at The Great Masturbator. It's something I will definitely Google, just so I can see what they're talking about. I love Dali, and the way I love how the artists of that time period really just did whatever they wanted, called their paintings whatever they wanted. You know, you had Andy Warhol with Blowjob, Dali, The Great Masturbator. It's a good time. Another example of an artist being influenced by Bosch's work is Leia Carrington, who saw Bosch's works in Museo del Prado in 1939 and culled from his complex compositions the inspiration she needed for her own mystical and spiritual paintings, which also drew upon the vocabulary of the organic kingdom. She drew a lot of animals and vegetation and painted depictions of the intertwining relationships between man, beast, and nature. And besides his direct influence on art, Bosch can actually be seen in a lot of other pop culture fields. And this is another thing that's super cool. This guy lived in the Renaissance era. He was born in the 1400s, and he's still influencing modern movements today in a way that artists like Da Vinci and Van Gogh are not really doing it. They do it in a different way. I'm not taking anything away from them. I'm just saying it's different. The Garden of Earthly Delights, his most famous painting, has become an incredibly popular icon in culture and psychedelic hippie circles dating back to the 1960s, as well as other mainstream media. The band Deep Purple's third album lifted the painting as a cover illustration in 1969, and other contemporary reinterpretations of the work are found in the paintings of Indian-born British artist Rakib Shah and in the American digital art of Carla Ganis, who also reimagined this very famous scene. He also inspired contemporary filmmakers such as Terry Gilliam, Guillermo del Toro, he created the movie Hellboy, and George Lucas. So you really think about, like, the monsters that you see in a lot of your favorite science fiction and fantasy movies, you have Bosch to thank for that, because a lot of his depictions of monsters were used to create the ones like the Sarlacc, I don't know about the Wampa, but definitely the Sarlacc from Star Wars, Hellboy, obviously, he's got the horns. Strains of his visions have also appeared in today's fantasy computer games, television shows like The Simpsons, the fashion collections of superstar designers Alexander McQueen, Christian Dior, and Valentino, and even books by writers such as the crime novelist Michael Connelly, who named one of his characters Hieronymus, I promise I will get that right by the end of this episode, Hieronymus Harry Bosch. And although only a very small portion of Bosch's works remain, I think I remember reading something like there's only actually 25 of them left, they still measure heavily as important contemporary glimpses into our centuries-long conflict with the concepts of right and wrong, our timeless existential struggles between good and bad, and obviously our fear of the unknown and our this like inherent knowledge that we have, but it's knowledge and it's not, because we know or we think that the world will end, but we don't know how, we don't know why, we don't know when, and we're constantly trying to depict what we think it'll be like, because it's something that goes so far beyond our consciousness that we can't actually grasp it. And an art critic by the name of Alistair Sook claims it is easy to understand why Bosch continues to fascinate us today. The apocalyptic tone of his work resonates during our era of global conflict and international terrorism, deeply emphasizing the complexities and catastrophic qualities of the work. And as art historian and early Netherlandish specialist Arwen Panofsky concluded, I cannot help feeling that the real secret of his magnificent nightmares and daydreams has still to be disclosed. And I think that that's a really good way to put it. That first quote talking about our global conflict and international terrorism, where, again, we live in this constant state of fear, and it's subconscious fear, and Bosch's paintings, in a way, give that fear a face, and it might not be the modern standard of fear, but for the Renaissance age, they probably were almost eerie to look at, creepy paintings, and people would look at them and almost feel this sense of relief, knowing that they were maybe understood. Or maybe I'm completely nuts, but that's kind of what I've taken from that. Going back to that thing about pop culture, I found this little fun fact that I really liked. Despite Bosch dying almost 500 years ago, his dark visions seem more popular than ever. He has a giant, attractive new coffee table book from art publisher Taschen, and in 2007, his hometown of Den Bosch finally gave him a museum. He is on a new line of Doc Martens, on leggings, and on cut-off jeans. And just so you know, so no one at your favorite brunch spot forgets about the Way of All Flesh, the guy has his own line of skateboards. He's so cool. Like, his stuff is everywhere. And the thing is, again, like I said at the beginning, you know the painting, but you don't know you know the painting, because it's literally everywhere. I really, really want the Doc Martens. Why are they so expensive? Can Doc Martens please sponsor me? I want them. Anyway, he's very, very famous, but in a way where it's like, if you look at, I'm going to keep using the Mona Lisa because she's someone I talked about in a previous episode. If you look at the Mona Lisa, you know it's Leonardo da Vinci. If you see someone wearing Bosch Doc Martens, you know you've seen it before, but you don't know why, and you don't know who it's by. And I think that's really cool, and I think if he was alive today, he'd really like that. Kind of like Banksy, where you look at a Banksy and you know it's Banksy, but you don't know who Banksy is. And I think he'd like that air of mysticism being applied to himself. He seemed like a really cool mystery guy, and I really like, too, that we really don't know that much about him, and that just keeps adding to the mystery. So that's definitely a lot longer than a 10-minute history, but we're going to jump into the most interesting and admittedly the comedic relief of this episode, and I'm actually reading and talking directly off of artspace.com. I found this article, and they called it the 10 absolute worst ways to die in a Hieronymus Bosch painting. I got the name right. Anybody notice that? Hieronymus. Woo! Anyway, here we are. The 10 absolute worst ways to die in a Hieronymus Bosch painting. Number 1. Oh, starts with 10 and goes up to 1. Okay. So this one is from a painting called, it's called The Extraction of the Stone of Madness or The Cure of Folly. And again, I really like the titles. I don't know if he named his works himself, but he calls the brain the Stone of Madness. I like that. It's true. So in this painting, a surgeon is removing the quote-unquote stupid stone from inside a man's head. Removal of the brain, according to Dutch folklore, was supposed to improve reasoning, which I love early medical practice. It is so funny because they really had no idea. And I'm guessing somebody slipped and fell, broke their head open, and everyone saw their brain, and they were like, oh, there's something in here. That's probably why he was dumb enough to fall, not realizing that we all have brains. I don't know, it's a good time. And so this painting, The Extraction of the Stone of Madness, there's text above the image, and it reads in Flemish, "Master, cut the stone out quickly." It's so dramatic. Please look up this painting. Look up all the paintings I'm about to talk about, because they're so, they're not supposed to be funny, but they kind of are, and they're, creepy, but the guy had a great sense of humor. And there is no actual proof that this particular surgery was performed in the era, and the painting is widely seen as making fun of blind faith in medicine. Okay, so they weren't actually cutting brains out. It was like a myth. But brain surgery was not unheard of in the period, and the instrument that the surgeon is using in this painting is actually a type of instrument that would have been used for an early brain surgery. But so I actually think the painting was a lot of people would have thought, wow, brain surgery is pretty wild, pretty out there. You should probably just let yourself die and save yourself the pain. And maybe this painting was kind of making fun of that. Number 9, waterboarded with liquor. I want to die that way. Can I please choose? That just fits so much with me as a person. It's ironic that Bosch disdained earthly pleasures, or at least painted as if he did, because he married and became very wealthy, and his wife's fortune gave him this level of discretion in what to paint and for whom, and he favored the topic of divine retribution. So basically what they're saying is he had so much money, he could literally paint whatever the fuck he wanted, and so he painted this topic of you're going to be punished for your sins. And there's this triptych called The Last Judgement, painted circa 1500, and it's full of these really grotesque ways of death, and among them is drinking to death. And in this detail from the painting, there's a giant demon. I'm looking at this. There's a giant red demon. He's like the fireball guy. I love Fireball, side note. He's the fireball demon. And they're holding him down as they pour liquor down this really fat guy's throat. And it's kind of implied that it's never ending, and he's just constantly being forced to drink. And again, this is something that's straight out of Dante's Inferno. Maybe they were friends. Would it have been the same? I don't know if it's the same time period. I think it was. It's been too long. Anyway, this is not it's not funny, but it kind of is, because I'm originally from the Napa Valley. Wine is a really big part of my life, my culture, and to see a painting of someone literally being forced to drink to death is, I don't know, it's kind of hilarious. For some people, the quote in this article is, for some people this is torture, for others it's Saturday night. It's really reminiscent of, you're at a party or a bar and your two friends are already totally wasted and they're like, come on, drink. And you're kind of like, no, I don't really want to. And you give in. And that's exactly what Bosch was showing in this painting. Number 8, being sneezed on throughout infinity. It's so creepy. Like, it's hard to believe that it's a Renaissance era painting because it looks like something almost modern. It's almost cartoony. And this painting is based off a 12th century book by an Irish monk who was very widely republished at the time. And if there was such a thing as a bestseller list back then, it would have definitely been on it. And this story tells us the tale of a knight who falls asleep and tours the afterlife. Again, it's very Dante's Inferno-esque. And as a result of what Tondal, also called New Dolly, has seen, he resolves to live a more spiritual life. And Bosch's Tondal's vision features a soup of naked people that sit in a primordial cesspool while a man with a giant nose sneezes onto them. And yeah, that's really fucking gross. It's like... It's funny, I read the quote and you're thinking, oh, that's an exaggeration. But then you look at the painting and that's exactly what it is. I like that Bosch, with the, like, Mona Lisa, again, talking about the Mona Lisa, when you look at it, there's all these questions. When you look at a Bosch painting, you're kind of like, yep, that's exactly what it is. Cool. Number 7, serving as the travel luggage of the damned. And this painting is actually like, it's a close-up of a bigger painting. A lot of these are actually like little fragments of bigger paintings, but it's in the bottom of this painting called Judgement. And it's an example of which the subject probably wished he was dead. He's being carted around by a goblin, and he's literally, if you're looking at it, he's hogtied on, like, it looks like a stick, and there's this little guy walking behind him, and he's got a head and feet and no body or anything else. He's just like, head and feet, here we go. What's that called, a cephalopod? Yeah, I think cephalopod. Yeah, it's where your feet are in your head. It's weird. And so he's being carted around by a goblin and pierced by arrows. I didn't even see the goblin, I thought that was a guy. No, there's like this frog thing with a beak and a human body and a really long tail, or maybe that's a coat. I don't know. He's got a bow and arrow, and this guy's being pierced with arrows, and he's okay. So yeah, the frog thing's the goblin, and it says the quote is, "This fellow also gets to enjoy everlasting upside down eye contact with a mutated peasant." So the foothead guy is a peasant. And he's just kind of following along, staring deeply into this poor little hog-tied man. Again, it's horrifying, and it's not supposed to be funny, but you can't help but laugh when you look at it because it's so ridiculous. And in Bosch's symbolology, arrows are considered to be evidence of succumbing to incorrect religious teachings. I guess. I don't know. Like, I'd have to research further to come up with an appropriate response to that. And although religious himself, though, Bosch depicted nuns and priests as often as liars or as livestock. And I actually deeply agree with this. There's been, in recent years, a lot of revelation about the church and about a lot of the things that have been covered up in the past. Particularly the one that hits home with me since I'm living in Ireland is the story of the Magdalene sisters and the horrors that they did to poor girls who had nowhere to go. And so I actually really agree with Bosch's depicting nuns and priests as liars or livestock, because it really goes to show that just because you are a part of a religious order does not inherently make you a good person. Interestingly, this Bosch painting became so well known and popular that Lucas Cranach the Elder painted a version of it later in the 16th century. If you follow my Instagram, you're probably going to start seeing a lot of little demonic creatures popping up on my feed, because I'm feeling divinely inspired by this guy. Number 6, Flayed to Ribbons by Harp Strings. Again, like, do I need to keep saying it? These paintings are so ridiculous. Like, you look at them and they're just so weird. Anyway, it's apparently his bizarre take on popular music of his time. So he was more of like an alternative guy and was not a fan of the pop genre, even in the 1400s. And so the Garden of Earthly Delights, I think this painting is actually from the Garden of Earthly Delights, and they believe it took over a decade to paint, and it's nearly 13 feet across, which, again, these paintings are fucking huge, and there's all these little tiny details. God, he deserves so much respect. Each corner is packed with these little tiny details, and a small section of the right panel crams in several unfortunate souls, plus a hurdy-gurdy, which is a musical instrument, I'm assuming. He was highly critical of leisure pursuits, gambling in particular, and in one notable image, a man is doomed to spend eternity rolling dice out of his mouth but while being attacked by giant insects. But the artist looked down on prosaic pastimes as well, which would be the playing and enjoyment of non-liturgical music among them. So he was definitely not a fan of the ballads and the happy Renaissance age music. He really just wanted to go listen to the choir. It's very funny though. I almost think that a lot of these depictions are meant to be like him and him showing how it felt being forced to listen to Renaissance music, like he's being filleted on the harp strings. Maybe that's how it feels to him, having to listen to it. I can relate. I really cannot stand country music. I grew up in the Wisconsin countryside. It's like, I always think to myself, I lived this for 12 years. I really don't need to listen to it. Anyway, number 5. Hooray! Your dragon food. Yay! I love dragons. This is horrifying. Bosch's paintings are full of mythological creatures, both ones of his own invention and the standards of fiction: dragons, harpies, arachne, spiders? Spiders are fictional? Please let spiders be fictional. Why can't spiders actually be fictional? I am so hurt. And these paintings, or these beings, don't usually have a place in religious art, but he got around that problem by making his horror paintings cautionary tales. It's like the modern genres of things trying to be like, oh yeah, the guns are okay because we're showing them not to use guns by shooting people in video games. It's kind of silly, but it does make a lot of sense. He presented these images in triptychs, which is a painting form associated with churches. So basically, he was like, oh no, I'm painting for the church, but all my paintings are horrifying. And this painting is literally a dragon with a knife looking over a wine barrel, and there's a guy in the barrel with all these little like frog creatures, and they're boiling, and the dragon is just like standing over him, about to eat him. There's a knife going through his neck though. I'm not sure what that's about. He's just kind of chilling there. Number 4, Boiled and Roasted. One of the earliest major works believed to be by Bosch is this wooden table, and it's the top is actually arranged in the shape of an eye, which almost feels like it's staring accusingly at you, and it depicts the 7 deadly sins: wrath, envy, avarice, lust, gluttony, pride, and sloth. And a corner image depicts the resulting punishment in hell. And so again, like, very Dante's Inferno-esque. I have to look up now if these two guys got together at some point, or if they just existed and just, like, mentally were on the same page. I don't know. And even though each punishment is awful on its own, the proud woman has her abdomen munched on by a lizard as she watches herself in a mirror. God. It's so creepy. It's so weird. But Yeah, there's like this little demon dude with like a balloon on his head holding up a mirror to this woman as a small lizard eats her stomach. And there's a guy sitting next to her who's just kind of like watching. And however, the worst fate is reserved for the greedy. They are boiled in a golden cauldron and roasted on spits. Yummy. Maybe the dragon's gonna eat them. It's so weird though. Oh god. Okay, 3, perforated and penetrated. Ooh. Ew. So there's a sinner bent over a spiked metal wheel. And this is actually, I'm pretty sure that was actually the spiked wheel was a common thing, because I know there was a St. Catherine and she was supposed to be put to death on this wheel of spikes. So I think this was actually a thing. All the historians that may or may not be listening to this are shaking their heads and being like, Emma, come on, stop. But anyway, so the sinner is bent over a spiked metal wheel and pushed into the blades by horrific but efficient creatures who seem to be enjoying themselves immensely. I mean, I can see it. There's also like a disembodied head floating in the background. And there's this black-winged ghoul that, I mean, there's no proof, but it really looks like he's engaging in sex. And so basically this guy is being impaled in the front and penetrated from behind by these 2 little demon dudes. Really lovely. 2, beaten on a razor's edge. Ooh, this one's like really uncomfortable. Oh, God. Ooh, the feels. His apocalyptic visions earned the artist the nickname of the Devil's Painter, but blood is actually surprisingly rare in Bosch's paintings. However, this gruesome image is the exception. The sinner is laying on the edge of a giant knife and being beaten with. And there's a lot of like severed body parts falling around him, meaning that he is not the first to undergo this torture. And it's like really, really sad. But household and everyday objects are really common in his work, from wheels to bells to funnels, mirrors, and whatnot. And it's cool, actually, because the knife looks very modern, as does the bell. And so you kind of realize that some things have greatly evolved and other things not so much. And that's kind of cool. Card tables and backgammon boards also appear frequently, especially in Hell. And like the general thought is because he believed that these were devices used in gambling and gambling was sinful or whatnot. I personally like to think he just hated backgammon so much that he saw it as being forced to play as his own personal hell, and that's why he painted it this way. Who knows? And number 1, the worst way to die in a Hieronymus Bosch painting is... Oh... I'm looking at this for the first time. Oh, this little, like, Birdman is devouring people. Oh, what the fuck? So, the Garden of Earthly Delights, again, it's, the first 2 panels depict Eden and Earth, but the third is a seething vision of hell. And this is one of his more creative pieces in terms of the way that people were dying. I mean, being flayed and being burned, those are pretty typical, but this is like totally fucked up. There's a giant bird and he's eating people and then he's shitting them out and into like this pit, which is hell. And these birds are flying out of their bodies and others are just like propped up, and there's all these like little damned souls everywhere. It's really sad. And oh my god, it's so weird. There's like a penguin on skis in the background. And yeah, so worst way to die would be to be eaten by a Birdman and then shit out into a pit of hell. And I really love this article, and the little close is, as a result of researching this story, we have resolved to lead a more spiritual life. Good for you guys, and thank you for sharing that article. I really liked it. Anyway, In case you were wondering why you were having nightmares about things that go bump in the night, or where you'd seen those Doc Martens before, now you know. It's a Hieronymus Bosch painting. Thank you guys for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please check us out on iTunes, Podbean, and soon to be Spotify. Leave a review or send me an email at artuncensoredpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at artuncensoredpodcast, like our Facebook page under the same name, or follow us on Twitter, which is artuncensoredpc. If you are interested in me and my personal life, you can visit my website, www.everythinginvinyl.com, or check out my Instagram, use Paintwater. And yeah, all credits go to me. I did all of this, except for the music. That's by Benjamin Dougherty. A link to his SoundCloud will be in the description of this episode, along with all my sources. I hope you guys enjoyed. Have a great day.